Green is best, that is what we know. Green is strongest, green is life, and life is pain. I remember the moment I first gained awareness. Not birth, orcs are not born, we emerge. From spores, from the ground, from the very essence of war itself. My first memory is of hunger. Terrible, gnawing hunger that drove me to fight even before I could form words. I bit and tore at the smaller ones around me, those who had emerged from the fungal cradle alongside me. I killed 3 before my body had fully formed. Their meat was my first meal. Their pain, my first joy. The fungal fields where we grew were at the edge of the warband's camp, a great sprawling mass of tents, shacks, and scrap vehicles that stretched as far as my new eyes could see. The air was thick with smoke, the stench of unwashed bodies, and the sweet rot of fungus. It was beautiful. It was home. I had no name then. Names are earned, not given. I was simply another boy, another piece of meat for the war machine, another fist in the endless fight. We smaller ones gathered in groups, instinctively seeking protection in numbers while simultaneously looking for opportunities to establish dominance. The weak were quickly culled. The strong grew stronger by consuming their flesh. This is our way. This has always been our way. The first real challenge came when a larger orc, one who had been alive for perhaps a week longer than me, decided I had grown too confident. He was called Guchewa, a name he had earned by his habit of attacking the throat. He charged at me while I was gnawing on a bone, hoping to catch me unaware. But I had been watching him, studying his movements. I knew his kind. I dropped the bone and met his charge head-on, driving my forehead into his nose with all my strength. The satisfying crunch of cartilage breaking was like music. Guchewa howled and staggered back, green blood pouring down his face. But he was bigger, and anger only makes an orc stronger. He came at me again, this time more cautiously. We circled each other, the other boys forming a ring around us, hooting and jeering, placing bets on which of us would soon be dinner. Guchewa feinted left, then lunged right, his jagged teeth aiming for my throat. I twisted away, but not fast enough. His teeth sank into my shoulder, tearing through the thin muscle. Pain shot through me, sharp and clarifying. Something happened. Something changed inside me. The pain did not weaken me. It focused me. It filled me with a rage so pure, so perfect, that everything else fell away. There was only Guchewa and me, and one of us would not see the next sunrise. I brought my knee up into his gut, forcing him to release his bite. Then I attacked, all thought gone, nothing but instinct and fury driving my fists into his face, over and over, until his features were a ruined mass of pulp and broken teeth. Even then I did not stop. I continued to pound and tear until someone larger pulled me off. It was a knob, one of the bosses, his skin darker green with age and experience, his body covered in crude metal armor and scars. He looked at what remained of Guchewa, then at me, and grunted something that might have been approval. "You fight good, runt," he said, his voice like rocks being crushed. "But you waste good meat." He was right. In my frenzy, I had rendered Guchewa inedible, the body too damaged to provide sustenance. It was wasteful, stupid. I lowered my eyes, expecting punishment. Instead, the knob tossed something at my feet. A crude club, little more than a length of metal with a handle wrapped in leather. "You grubskull now," the knob declared. "You eat last tonight for wasting meat. Tomorrow, you join raid." And so I was named. Grubskull, not for any great deed or particular feature, but for the simple brutality with which I had destroyed Guchewa. It was not a name to inspire fear or respect, but it was mine. It marked me as something more than just another boy. That night, as the knob had decreed, I ate last. The choicest cuts were long gone by the time I was allowed to approach the cooking pits. I made do with gristle and half-burned fat, but it was enough. I had survived my first real fight. I had earned a name. I had been given a weapon. Tomorrow, I would join a raid. Tomorrow, I would truly begin to live. Sleep came in fitful bursts, my new weapon clutched tightly to my chest. Around me, the warband continued its nightly activities. Fights broke out sporadically. Laughter and roars of pain mingled with the constant background noise of machinery being tinkered with, metal striking metal as weapons were repaired or improved. The smell of smoke and cooking meat never faded. This cacophony was our lullaby, the discord that somehow made perfect sense to our kind. I dreamed of battle, of glory, of growing larger and stronger with each enemy slain. I dreamed of one day becoming a nob myself, perhaps even challenging the war boss. These were good dreams, proper orky dreams, but beneath them lurked something else, something I could not quite grasp. A sense of purpose beyond simple violence, a direction, a calling. Morning came with the roar of engines and the bellowing of nobs gathering their squads. I rose quickly, eager to prove myself. My shoulder still throbbed where Guchua had bitten me, but the wound was already closing. We heal fast, we orcs. It is one of our greatest strengths. As long as we are not killed outright, we will recover, often stronger than before. The nob who had named me, who I learned was called Scracker, gathered his boys together. There were perhaps 30 of us, a mix of sizes and experience. Some had crude armor cobbled together from scrap metal and leather. Others, like me, wore nothing but the tough green skin we were born with. All had weapons of some kind, mostly clubs and axes, with a few lucky ones carrying salvaged guns. Scracker himself was an impressive sight in the morning light. Standing nearly twice my height, his body was a map of old wounds and badly healed injuries. One of his tusks was broken, the jagged remainder filed to a wicked point. His right eye was milky with blindness, yet he moved with a predatory grace that belied his bulk. His weapon of choice was a massive cleaver that looked to have once been part of some Imperial machinery. Now it was an instrument of death in the hands of a master. "Listen up, runts," Scracker growled, his good eye scanning us with contempt. "Today we hit Hume Farm. Small place, few guards, easy meat, easy loot. But any boy who runs, I kill myself. Any boy who gets in my way, I kill. Any boy who takes loot before I say, I kill. Understand?" We all nodded or grunted our acknowledgement. The rules were simple and fair. Scracker was boss. We followed, fought, and maybe lived to fight again. Those who disobeyed died, and their equipment became available to the rest of us. It was a system that had worked for countless generations of orcs across numberless battlefields. We piled into the back of a battle wagon, a massive ramshackle vehicle that seemed held together more by faith than engineering. Its sides were reinforced with scavenged metal, and crude spikes protruded at odd angles. The driver, a particularly enthusiastic orc with goggles strapped to his face, revved the engine repeatedly, producing clouds of black smoke and a deafening roar that sent nearby squigs scurrying for cover. As we lurched into motion, I found myself wedged between two larger boys. One, who called himself Zoggit, had been in several raids before. He claimed to have killed 10 humans in a single fight, though the number seemed to grow with each telling. The other, Crunch, said nothing at all but stared straight ahead with an intensity that was unsettling even by orc standards. The journey was uncomfortable. The battle wagon had no suspension to speak of, and every bump in the wasteland sent us crashing into each other. This inevitably led to fights breaking out, which Scracker quelled with swift brutality. By the time our destination came into view, 2 boys were nursing broken arms, and one lay unconscious in the corner, blood leaking from his ears. The human settlement was exactly as Scracker had described: small, isolated, vulnerable. It was surrounded by fields of crops, neat rows stretching to meet a forest on the far side. A few buildings clustered together at the center, with one larger structure that might have been a storage facility or a community hall. From our vantage point on a ridge overlooking the valley, I could see tiny figures moving about, unaware of the green tide about to crash down upon them. Scracker raised his cleaver. "No shooting unless I say," he ordered. "Too noisy. want to be in close before they know we here. When I give signal, we charge, kill everything that moves, burn what cannot be carried. Understand? Again, we signaled our understanding. The battle wagon was positioned for a quick escape once the raid was complete. We disembarked and began to make our way down the ridge, using the sparse vegetation for cover. My heart was pounding, not with fear but with anticipation. This would be my first real fight against an enemy, not just another orc. This would be the true test of my worth. As we drew closer, I could make out more details. The humans were primarily engaged in agricultural work, tending to their crops with simple tools. There were perhaps 20 of them visible, mostly adults with a few younger ones mixed in. I saw no obvious weapons, though I knew humans could be deceptive. They might have guns hidden away, ready to be brought out at the first sign of danger. We reached the edge of the fields, still undetected. Skraka raised his cleaver again, then brought it down in a vicious arc. The signal to attack. What followed was a blur of violence and exhilaration. We burst from cover, a wave of green muscle and crude weapons, bellowing our war cries. The humans looked up in shock, their faces transitioning from confusion to terror in an instant. Some ran for the buildings, others froze in place, as if disbelieving the nightmare charging toward them. A few, braver or more foolish than the rest, raised their farming tools in defiance. I found myself sprinting toward one such human, a male who stood his ground with a long-handled farming implement held before him like a spear. He jabbed it at me as I approached, the metal tip grazing my chest. The pain was nothing, less than nothing. I swung my club, connecting with his side. I felt ribs crack beneath the impact. The human went down. Gasping, I stood over him, raised my club again, and brought it down upon his head. The sensation was unlike anything I had experienced before, different from killing another orc. This was prey, not a rival. The satisfaction was in the hunt, not the challenge. I roared my triumph to the sky, then turned to find another target. All around me, my fellow boys were engaged in similar acts of slaughter. Humans fell before us like wheat before a scythe. Some fought back with surprising effectiveness, managing to wound or even kill a few of the smaller or less careful orcs. But the outcome was never in doubt. We overwhelmed them through sheer numbers and savagery. Skraka was a whirlwind of destruction, his cleaver rising and falling in a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Each stroke claimed a life. He moved with purpose, heading for the largest building, cutting down anyone who stood in his path. I followed in his wake, dispatching wounded humans who still showed signs of life. One grabbed at my ankle as I passed, a female with determination in her eyes, even as blood leaked from her mouth. I respected her spirit, so I made her end quick. A single blow, precisely delivered. It was more mercy than most of my kind would show. We reached the large building, which I now saw was indeed a storage facility. Inside were sacks of grain, preserved foods, and various tools. Skraka ordered half, and the boys to begin loading as much as they could carry. The rest of us continued the assault on the remaining buildings, hunting down any humans who had sought shelter. I found myself approaching a small structure set apart from the others. It was simple, just 4 walls and a roof, with a single door and 1 window. The door was barred from inside. I could hear movement within, hushed voices trying to be silent. I smiled, more prey. With a roar, I charged the door, my shoulder slamming into the wood. It shuddered but held. I backed up and tried again, putting more force behind it. This time I heard the bar begin to splinter. One more charge and the door gave way, sending me stumbling into the dimly lit interior. 3 humans cowered in the corner, an adult female and 2 young ones, all with the same light-colored hair and pale skin. The adult pushed the young ones behind her and faced me with a small blade held before her. Her hand shook, but her eyes held the same determination I had seen in the female outside. "Stay back, monster," she said in the human tongue. I understood her words, though I did not know how. Perhaps knowledge of the enemy's language is born into us, just as the knowledge of how to fight is instinctive. I advanced slowly, savoring the moment. The human jabbed her blade at me, a feeble gesture that I easily avoided. I could have killed her instantly, but something made me hesitate. Not mercy. Orcs do not know mercy. It was curiosity. I wanted to see what she would do, how far she would go to protect her offspring. The answer came swiftly. She lunged at me with unexpected speed, her blade finding a gap in my tough hide, sinking into the muscle of my thigh. Pain flared, sharp and immediate. I roared in anger and swung my club, catching her on the shoulder. She fell but scrambled back up, placing herself once more between me and the young ones. "Run!" she shouted to them. "Run now!" The young ones darted past her, trying to reach the broken door. I moved to intercept them, but the female threw herself at me again, this time aiming for my eyes. Her dedication to protecting her spawn was impressive, foolish but impressive. I caught her by the throat and lifted her off the ground. She kicked and struggled, her blade slashing ineffectively at my arm. The young ones had reached the doorway. They would not get far. Other boys would find them soon enough. I looked into the female's eyes as her struggles began to weaken. There was no fear there now, only hatred and something else, something I had never seen before. A strange acceptance, as if she had made peace with her end because she had done all she could for her young. It was that unfamiliar emotion that decided me. I snapped her neck quickly, giving her a clean death. It felt right, somehow. A recognition of her warrior spirit, even if she was just a human. I stepped outside to see one of the young ones already lying dead in the dirt, Zoggit standing over the body with a bloody axe. The other was running toward the fields, small legs pumping desperately. I started to give chase, then stopped as Skraka's roar echoed across the settlement. Back to wagon, now. The recall signal. All orcs knew to obey instantly. I turned away from the escaping human child and joined the flow of boys heading back to the battle wagon, many now laden with loot. As I walked, I examined the wound in my thigh. It was not deep, already beginning to clot. The blade had been small and the human female not very strong. Still, she had managed to hurt me. It was a lesson. Never underestimate prey, no matter how weak they might appear. Back at the battle wagon, Skraka was counting heads and inspecting the loot. 4 boys had been killed in the raid, their bodies left where they fell. Orcs do not retrieve their dead. There is no point. Their spores would ensure new orcs would grow in that soil eventually. The cycle would continue. The raid had been successful. Food, tools, and a few weapons had been secured. But Skraka seemed displeased, his scarred face set in a deeper scowl than usual. "Too many dead," he growled. "Humies should not have killed any of us. You all fight like grots." He singled out one boy who had a human gun clutched in his hands. "You." I said no shooting. "You shot anyway." The boy, whose name I did not know, looked down at the weapon in his hands as if surprised to find it there. "Got it from dead Humie," he protested. "Did not shoot. Just took gun." Skraka's response was immediate and final. His cleaver split the boy from shoulder to sternum. The 2 halves of his body fell away from each other, blood and viscera spilling onto the ground. Skraka pointed at me. "Grubskull, take gun. You earned it today." I stepped forward, careful to show proper deference, and picked up the weapon from the dead boy's grasp. It was a las gun, a standard Imperial issue. Nothing special to humans, but to an orc boy, it was a significant upgrade from a simple club. I held it awkwardly, unfamiliar with its balance and operation, but pleased nonetheless. The journey back to camp was quieter than the outbound trip. We were tired from the fight, satisfied with our success. A few minor squabbles broke out over choice pieces of loot, quickly settled with fists or headbutts. I kept to myself, examining my new weapon and replaying the events of the raid in my mind. The human female's eyes haunted me. Not with guilt, orcs do not feel guilt, but with a question I could not quite formulate. Something about her willingness to die for her offspring seemed important, though I could not say why. It was not the Orky way. We fight for ourselves, for the joy of battle, for the status that comes with victory, not for others, never for others. Yet I could not shake the feeling that I had witnessed something significant in that small building, something worth understanding, even if it was a human trait. We reached the camp as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the jumbled assortment of shelters and vehicles. Scracker ordered the loot to be taken to the war boss's tent for inspection and distribution. The food would go to the communal cooking pits, the weapons and tools to the mechs for evaluation and possible modification. I moved to follow the others, but Scracker held me back with a massive hand on my shoulder. "You fought good today, Grubskull," he said, his voice slightly less harsh than usual. "Not afraid. Used your head, not just your fists. That good, rare in new boy." I stood straighter, pride swelling in my chest. Praise from a knob was uncommon and valuable. "Thank you, boss," I replied, using the title of respect. Scracker nodded toward my new lasgun. "Learn to use that right. Could be useful. Could get you killed. Gun jams, runs out of charge, enemy still coming, always have backup." He tapped the cleaver at his side. "Cold steel never fails." This was the most Scracker had ever spoken to me, or to any boy in my hearing. It was clearly meant as a form of mentorship, rare among our kind where most learning comes through brutal experience rather than instruction. "I understand, boss," I said. "We'll practice. We'll be ready next raid." Scracker grunted, apparently satisfied. "Go eat. Rest. Tomorrow we raid again. Different target. Harder fight. Better loot." With that, he strode away, leaving me standing alone with my thoughts and my new weapon. I made my way to the cooking pits, where the day's spoils were already being prepared. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, making my stomach growl with anticipation. I had earned my place at the feast today. I would not eat last tonight. As I approached, I saw Zoggett and Crunch already there, tearing into chunks of meat with their sharp teeth. Zoggett waved me over, surprisingly friendly given our competitive nature. "Grubskull got gun," he observed as I sat down beside him. "Good raid for you." I nodded, accepting a piece of meat from one of the smaller orcs, tending the fire. "Good raid for all," I replied. "You kill quick. Saw you with small Humie." Zoggett grinned, showing meat caught between his teeth. "Easy kill. No challenge, like stepping on bug. You kill any?" "2," I said. "One fought back, had knife." I pointed to the wound on my thigh, now little more than a red line. "Got me here." Zoggett laughed. "Humie hurt you? You getting soft, Grubskull." I bristled at the implication of weakness but kept my temper in check. Zoggett was testing me, looking for a reaction. It was how orcs established hierarchy, through constant challenges and posturing. I had already proven myself once today. I did not need to do so again. "Not soft," I replied calmly. "Smart. Learn from enemy. Next time kill faster." Zoggett seemed disappointed by my restraint but did not press the issue. Crunch, as usual, said nothing, focused entirely on his food. I wondered, not for the first time, if there was something wrong with him. Most orcs love to boast and argue almost as much as they love to fight. Crunch's silence marked him as different, potentially dangerous in a culture that prizes conformity despite its chaotic nature. As night fully descended, the camp transformed. Fires burned brighter, casting wild shadows across the rough landscape. Music, if it could be called that, began to pulse through the air, produced by crude drums and improvised instruments. Orcs with no formal role as musicians simply played what felt right, creating a discordant but strangely compelling rhythm that spoke to something primordial in our nature. Some boys began to dance, a violent stomping movement that mimicked combat while serving as a form of ritualized aggression. Others engaged in wrestling matches or simple tests of strength, like arm wrestling or rock-throwing competitions. A few, exhausted from the day's activities, simply found quiet corners to sleep or work on their equipment. I chose the latter, finding a spot near one of the smaller fires where I could examine my lasgun more carefully. I field stripped it as best I could, figuring out its components through trial and error. It was surprisingly simple technology, at least in its basic operation. A power cell provided energy, which was focused through a series of lenses and emitters to produce a concentrated beam of light capable of burning through flesh and some lighter materials. The weapon had about half a charge left, according to the crude indicator on the side. Not enough for sustained combat, but sufficient for practice and emergencies. I would need to find more power cells or a way to recharge this one if I wanted to rely on the lasgun in future raids. As I reassembled the weapon, I became aware of a presence nearby. Looking up, I saw one of the mechs watching me with interest. Mechs were orcs with a natural affinity for technology, able to create and repair machinery through some instinctive understanding that most of us lacked. This one was of medium size, his body adorned with various tools and mechanical bits integrated directly into his flesh. "New shooter you got there, boy?" the mech said, his voice tinged with the distinctive accent common to his kind. "Want me to make it more killy?" I hesitated. Mech modifications were desirable, making weapons more powerful or adding unexpected features, but they also tended to make Imperial technology less reliable, more prone to malfunctions or explosive failures. I recalled Skruka's advice about always having a backup. "What would you do to it?" I asked cautiously. The mech grinned, revealing metal teeth that gleamed in the firelight. "Could make beam hotter, more burny, could add bayonet for when charge runs out, could make it louder, scarier." All tempting options, but I was not convinced. "What does it cost?" I asked, knowing that nothing came free in Orc society. "2 teeth," the mech replied, naming his price in the universal Orc currency of teeth, specifically the larger tusks that grew throughout our lives and occasionally fell out, to be replaced by larger ones. It was a fair price, but I had no teeth to spare, not yet. I was too new, and had not collected any from fallen foes or lost any of my own in combat. "No teeth yet," I admitted. "After next raid, maybe." The mech nodded, unsurprised. "Come find Nazgrim when you got teeth, make your shooter proper orky." With that, he wandered off, likely in search of customers who could actually pay for his services. I finished reassembling the lasgun and set it aside, making sure it was within easy reach. Then I leaned back against a convenient rock and stared into the fire, letting my mind drift. The images from the raid played through my thoughts again: the human settlement, the fighting, the female with the knife and her strange, sacrificial courage. Sleep eventually claimed me, bringing dreams of battle, as always. But this time, there was something new mixed in with the familiar visions of glory and conquest. A sense of searching, of looking for something beyond the next fight. It was unsettling, unorky. I pushed it away, focusing instead on the simpler pleasures of imagined violence. Morning came too soon, heralded by the same cacophony of activity that marked every day in the camp. I awoke stiff but rested, my body having healed completely during the night. The wound on my thigh was now just a faint line, barely visible against my green skin. I gathered my weapons, the club now relegated to backup status with the lasgun taking primary position, and made my way to where Skruka's squad was assembling. Today's raid would be different, he had said, harder. I was eager to prove myself again, to cement my growing status within the group. The target, as Skruka explained, was another human settlement, but this one was better defended. A mining outpost with a small garrison of Imperial Guard, real soldiers, not just farmers with tools. They would have guns, training, possibly even light armor or defensive positions. More risk, Skruka acknowledged. More reward, good guns, good armor, good fight. He assigned specific roles this time, a level of planning unusual for an orc raid. Most of the boys, including me, would form the main assault force, charging directly at the front gates of the outpost. A smaller group, led by Skruka himself, would circle around and attack from the rear once the defenders were engaged with us. It was a simple pincer movement, but it showed a tactical awareness that surprised me. We traveled in 2 battle wagons this time, along with a small group of orc bikers who would provide mobile support and chase down any humans who tried to flee. The journey took longer, the outpost being further from our camp and situated in rougher terrain. As we approached, I got my first glimpse of our target. It was more impressive than the farm, a collection of sturdy buildings surrounded by a perimeter wall made of rockreat and metal. Guard towers stood at each corner, and I could see the glint of weapons as sentries scanned the surrounding area. The outpost was built into the side of a hill, with what appeared to be mine entrances visible as dark openings in the rock face. Whatever they were extracting must have been valuable enough to warrant the military presence. Valuable to humans meant valuable to us, if only because taking it would cause them pain. The main gates faced a cleared area, deliberately devoid of cover to give defenders a clear field of fire. It was this killing ground that we would have to cross in our frontal assault. I felt a twinge of something that might have been apprehension in a different species. In an orc, it was merely heightened awareness, the body preparing itself for the challenge ahead. The knob leading our assault group, a scarred veteran named Gragskull, was more taciturn than Skraka but no less intimidating. He gave us simple instructions. When I say go, you go, run fast, shoot if you have gun, get to wall, get over wall, kill, everything inside. Any questions? There were none. The plan was straightforward enough. The complexity lay in surviving long enough to reach the wall. We positioned ourselves at the edge of the tree line, ready to burst forth on command. Skraka's group had already departed, circling wide to approach from the opposite side. The bikers were distributed on both flanks, engines idling with an impatient growl that matched my own mood. Gragskull raised his hand, holding us in place as he watched the guard towers through a pair of looted binoculars. He was waiting for something, though I did not know what. Then I heard it, a distant explosion from the far side of the outpost, Skraka's signal. "Go!" Gragskull roared, lowering his hand in a chopping motion. And we went. 30 orcs charging across open ground toward a defended position, bellowing war cries and brandishing weapons. It was glorious. It was insane. It was perfectly orky. The response was immediate. Lasgun fire erupted from the towers and the wall, red beams cutting through the air around us. 2 boys fell in the first volley, their bodies tumbling lifelessly to the ground. Another was hit in the leg but continued to run, dragging the wounded limb behind him with stubborn determination. I ran in a zigzag pattern, making myself a harder target while still maintaining forward momentum. My lasgun was clutched in both hands, useless until I got closer. Imperial Guard weapons had better range than most orc firearms, and my looted lasgun was no exception. Another boy fell just ahead of me, a lasbolt burning through his throat in a spray of steam and blood. I leapt over his body without breaking stride. The wall was getting closer. 50 meters. 40. 30. The fire was intensifying, more orcs falling as the guards found their range. I heard the distinctive roar of orc shooters joining the fray as some of the boys with longer-ranged weapons began to return fire. Most of the shots went wide, orc marksmanship being notoriously poor, but it provided some covering fire as we closed the distance. 20 meters. I raised my lasgun and squeezed the trigger, aiming roughly at one of the guards visible on the wall. The weapon kicked slightly in my hands, a beam of red light lancing out to strike the wall just below my target. Too low. I adjusted and fired again. This time the beam caught the guard in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him toppling backward out of sight. Elation surged through me. My first ranged kill. It felt different from close combat, less visceral but no less satisfying. I fired again and again, not really aiming now but adding to the general suppressing fire as we closed the final distance to the wall. 10 meters. The ground around me was erupting in small puffs of dust as last bolts struck all around. I felt a searing pain across my upper arm where one shot grazed me, burning away a strip of skin. It only fueled my battle rage. 5 meters. We had reached the base of the wall, those of us who had survived the charge. About half our original number, I estimated, though I had no time for an accurate count. Gragskull was there, shouting orders, organizing the assault on the wall itself. Some boys produced crude grappling hooks attached to ropes, which they began to swing above their heads. Others simply started to climb, using the rough surface of the rockreat and any protruding features as handholds. I opted for the latter approach, slinging my lasgun across my back and beginning to scale the 3-meter-high barrier. The guards above were now leaning over, firing down at us at point-blank range. One boy next to me took a last bolt directly to the top of his head, his skull exploding in a shower of bone fragments and brain matter. His body toppled backward, nearly taking me with it. I clung to the wall, finding new handholds, continuing to climb. I reached the top and hauled myself over the edge, coming face to face with a startled human guard. Before he could bring his weapon to bear, I grabbed him by the front of his uniform and pulled, using his own weight to topple him over the edge. His scream was cut short by the impact below. Now, on top of the wall, I unslung my lasgun and took stock of the situation. The outpost was in chaos. Skraka's rear assault had breached the back gate, and his group was now rampaging through the compound. Fires had broken out in several buildings, and the sounds of combat echoed from all directions. The guards were trying to mount an organized defense, falling back to a central building that likely served as their barracks or command center. They moved with a discipline that was alien to orc warfare, covering each other's retreats, laying down suppressing fire in coordinated volleys. Gragskull had made it over the wall and was rallying those of us who had survived the initial assault. "Push them," he commanded, pointing toward the central building. "No escape, no mercy." We surged forward, a green tide flowing through the outpost. I fired my lasgun at any human I saw, scoring hits with increasing accuracy as I became more familiar with the weapon. My charge gauge was dropping rapidly, but I had no time to worry about that now. As we approached the central building, the resistance stiffened. The guards had established a perimeter, using crates and barricades to create firing positions. They were no longer retreating but making a stand. Gragskull assessed the situation with the experienced eye of a veteran warrior. "Flank left," he ordered half the group. "Rest with me, straight at them, draw fire." I found myself in the frontal assault group. We charged directly at the human barricades, firing as we ran, creating a wall of las bolts and crude bullets that forced the defenders to duck for cover. The first wave of us crashed into the barricades like a green tsunami. I vaulted over a stack of crates and landed amongst 3 human guards. My lasgun's charge was depleted, so I swung it like a club, catching one guard across the face with enough force to shatter bone. I dropped the weapon and drew my backup club, the familiar weight comforting in my hand as I engaged the other 2. They fought well for humans, working together, one trying to distract me while the other looked for an opening. But they were facing an orc, and not just any orc. I was Grubskull, veteran of 2 raids now, killer of humans. I feinted toward one, then spun and brought my club down on the other's shoulder with a satisfying crunch. As he fell, I charged the remaining guard, absorbing a knife thrust to my side without slowing. My club connected with his ribs, then his head, and he went down in a heap. All around me, similar scenes played out as orcs engaged in close combat with the defenders. What we lacked in technique, we made up for in strength, ferocity, and numbers. The human line buckled, then broke. They retreated into their central building, sealing the heavy metal door behind them. Gragskull surveyed the situation, his face contorted in a grin that was equal parts pleasure and frustration. "Need to get inside," he growled. "Skraka, bring demo charge." Skraka emerged from the crowd, holding what appeared to be a large bundle of explosives cobbled together by one of the mechs. He approached the door, placed the charge against it, and activated some kind of crude timer mechanism. "Back!" he shouted, retreating quickly. We all took cover behind whatever was available, some diving behind barricades, others simply hitting the dirt. The explosion was magnificent, a flower of flame and smoke that blossomed outward, sending the reinforced door flying inward. Before the dust had even settled, we were up and charging through the newly created entrance. Inside was a scene of desperate last stands and bloody close-quarters combat. The remaining guards had taken positions behind overturned tables, in doorways, anywhere that offered some protection. They fought with the determination of those who know they are doomed but refuse to accept it. I found myself pushing forward alongside Crunch, the silent orc who had been at the cooking fires the previous night. He fought with a cold efficiency that contrasted sharply with the typical orc berserker rage. Each movement was precise, each blow calculated to disable or kill with minimal effort. It was almost artistic, in its own brutal way. We cleared room after room, leaving nothing alive in our wake. In one chamber, we found what appeared to be the mining operations administrative center. Maps and charts covered the walls, and a large table dominated the center of the room. On it was a detailed model of the surrounding area, with the mine and outpost represented in miniature. Crunch grunted, the first sound I had heard him make voluntarily. He pointed at the model, then at a specific location marked with a small red flag. I did not understand the significance, but I could tell he thought it important. Our exploration was interrupted by a burst of gunfire from the doorway. A human officer, distinguished by the insignia on his uniform, was firing a compact auto pistol at us. Crunch took a round to the shoulder but barely seemed to notice. He charged the officer, moving with that same eerie precision. The human managed to get off 2 more shots before Crunch reached him. Both hit, one in the chest and one in the thigh, but neither slowed the orc's advance. Crunch lifted the officer by the throat, studied his face for a moment, then slammed him against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. The human gasped, blood trickling from his mouth, but still defiant. "Filthy Xenos," he spat. "The Emperor protects." Crunch tilted his head, as if considering these words, then simply crushed the man's windpipe with a squeeze of his massive hand. He let the body drop, then turned back to me, his expression unreadable. The sounds of combat were fading now, replaced by the whoops and bellows of combat with victorious orcs. The outpost had fallen. Any humans not killed in the fighting were being rounded up, either to be killed for sport or taken as slaves, depending on Skraka's mood. I made my way back outside, where orcs were already looting anything of value. Weapons, ammunition, food, tools, all were being gathered and sorted for transport back to camp. Several boys were loading mining equipment onto one of the battle wagons, directed by a mech who seemed particularly interested in the human technology. Skraka was standing with Groggskull near the breached door, discussing something in low tones. As I approached, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Warboss will want to know," Groggskull was saying. "Could be important." Skraka nodded, his expression serious. "We'll tell him. Need to send scouts first. Make sure." They noticed me hovering nearby and fell silent. Skraka gave me an appraising look, noting the wounds I had accumulated during the assault. "You still alive, Grubskull?" he observed, getting tougher. I straightened, recognizing the compliment. "Good fight, boss. Killed many humies." Skraka grunted. "Seen you fighting. Not bad for new boy. But lost your shooter." He gestured to my club, my only remaining weapon. "Charge ran out," I explained. "Used as club, then broke on Humie helmet." Groggskull laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Always told you, Skraka. Imperial stuff no good. Orky weapons better." Skraka shrugged. "Sometimes true, sometimes not. Grubskull need new weapon either way." He pointed to a pile of looted guns. "Take your pick. Earned it." I moved to the pile and examined the offerings. Most were lasguns similar to the one I had lost, but there were also a few autoguns and shotguns. What caught my eye, however, was a weapon unlike the others. It was bulkier, with a large drum magazine and a wide barrel, a flamer designed to spew promethium in a deadly arc of burning liquid. I picked it up, feeling its weight, testing its balance. It was heavier than the lasgun, but somehow felt right in my hands. The thought of enemies burning, screaming as their flesh melted, appealed to me on a primal level. Skraka noticed my choice and nodded approvingly. Good weapon. Scary weapon. Make humies run. Easy to kill when they running. I slung the flamer across my back, already imagining its use in the next raid. The thought brought a savage grin to my face, my tusks jutting out prominently as I anticipated future glories. The journey back to camp was triumphant, the battle wagons laden with loot, the surviving orcs high on victory and bloodlust. We had lost perhaps a third of our force, but such casualties were expected and accepted. Those who died were not mourned. They had fallen in battle, the most honorable end an orc could hope for. Upon our return, we found the camp in a state of unusual activity. Orcs were gathering in large numbers around the war boss's compound, a collection of large tents and crude buildings at the center of the encampment. Something significant was happening. Skraka and Gragskull immediately headed in that direction, ordering the rest of us to unload the battle wagons and bring the best of the loot to present to the war boss. I helped with this task, my new flamer drawing envious looks from some of the other boys. Once the vehicles were emptied, we followed our leaders toward the gathering. The crowd parted for Skraka, his status as a favored nob earning him deference even among this rowdy assembly. I stayed close behind him, curiosity driving me forward. At the center of the gathering was the largest orc I had ever seen. The war boss, Grimtooth the Skull Taker, was a mountain of muscle and crude armor, his skin a dark green bordering on black, his tusks like daggers protruding from his massive jaw. One of his eyes had been replaced with a mechanical substitute that glowed red in its socket. He carried a power claw on one arm, the energy field surrounding it crackling with barely contained force, while his other hand gripped a massive shooter that would have required 2 hands for a normal orc to wield. Beside the war boss stood a smaller figure, hunched and twisted. A weird boy, one of the rare orcs born with psychic abilities. This one was adorned with fetishes and talismans, bones and teeth hanging from his clothing and pierced through his skin. His eyes were wild, unfocused, occasionally flashing with unnatural energy as the psychic power built up within him threatened to discharge. Skraka approached the war boss, head lowered in a show of respect that stopped short of submission. "Successful raid, boss," he reported. "Good loot, good kills." Grimtooth barely acknowledged this, his attention focused on the weird boy, who was swaying slightly and muttering to himself. "Tell him what you found," the war boss commanded Skraka. Skraka hesitated, glancing around at the assembled orcs. "In private, maybe?" Grimtooth's mechanical eye whirred as it focused on Skraka. "Now," he growled, the single word carrying enough menace to make even a hardened knob flinch. "Found Humie maps," Skraka said, producing a rolled parchment from his belt. "Show big force moving this way. Many soldiers, tanks, big guns." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was significant news. The human settlement and mining outpost we had raided were just the outer edges of Imperial presence in this region. If a larger force was moving in, it could mean war on a scale beyond simple raids. Grimtooth took the map, his power claw deactivated temporarily to allow him to handle the delicate material. He studied it with surprising thoughtfulness for an orc, his one natural eye narrowing as he traced the marked routes. "How long?" he asked. Skraka shrugged. "Hard to say. Map not clear on time, but soon. Days, not weeks." The war boss handed the map to one of his attendants, a runty orc who scurried away with it. Then he turned to the weird boy, who had become more agitated, small sparks of energy now, visibly crackling around his head. "You," Grimtooth addressed the twitching figure. "What do you see?" The weird boy's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly focused and blazing with green fire. When he spoke, his voice had changed, deeper and somehow echoing as if coming from a great distance. "War comes," he intoned. "Great war, blood and fire. Metal giants stride the land. The sky burns green. I see a gathering, a calling. The Waaagh approaches." A hush fell over the assembled orcs. The Waaagh was more than just a battle cry. It was a psychic phenomenon, a gestalt field generated by large concentrations of orcs that enhanced their abilities and drove them into a state of coordinated frenzy. It was war elevated to religious experience, the ultimate expression of orcish nature. Grimtooth's face split in a terrible grin. "The Waaagh," he repeated, savoring the word. "It has been too long, too many small fights, time for proper war." He raised his power claw, the energy field reactivating with a threatening hum. "Prepare," he roared to the assembly. "Sharpen your choppers, load your shooters, tune your engines, we go to war." The response was immediate and deafening. Every orc present began to chant, stamp, and brandish weapons. "Waaagh, Waaagh, Waaagh." The sound built upon itself, growing in volume and intensity until it seemed to physically vibrate the air. I found myself joining in, caught up in the primal energy of the moment. The chant resonated with something deep within me, something coded into my very being. This was what it meant to be orc. This was our purpose: war, conquest. The glorious release of violence on a scale beyond imagination. The gathering began to disperse as orcs rushed to follow the war boss's orders, preparing for the coming conflict. Skrakka gathered his boys, including me, in a small circle away from the main commotion. "Big changes coming," he told us, his voice low but vibrating with excitement. "Waaagh, not small thing, not raid, not skirmish, proper war, many orcs, many fights, many chances to get bigger, stronger." This was important information for us newer boys. In orc physiology, growth was tied directly to success in combat. The more an orc fought and won, the larger and stronger he became. A Waaagh meant opportunities for advancement, unlike anything a simple raid could provide. "What do we do, boss?" Zoggett asked, practically bouncing with anticipation. Skrakka thought for a moment. "First, get ready. Check weapons. Fix armor. Eat good. Rest good. Need all strength," he pointed to me. "Grubskull, you know how to use that burner?" I nodded, though in truth I had never handled a flamer before. How difficult could it be? Point and squeeze the trigger. The burning would take care of itself. Skrakka seemed skeptical of my confidence. "Find Nazgrim," he suggested, referring to the mech who had offered to modify my lasgun. "He show you proper way. No good burning self instead of enemy." This was sound advice, and I set off to locate the mech. I found him in his workshop, a chaotic space filled with half-dismantled machinery, loose parts, and various tools whose purpose I could not begin to guess. Nazgrim was working on what appeared to be a mounted gun of some kind, far larger than anything man-portable. He looked up as I approached, recognition dawning on his grease-stained face. "Ah, gun boy. Got teeth now?" I shook my head. "Not here for upgrade. Need help with this." I presented the flamer for his inspection. Nazgrim set aside his tools and took the weapon, turning it over in his hands with the reverence some might reserve for religious artifacts. "Nice burner," he commented. "Imperial Guard issue. Good quality. Not as killy as Orc burner, but more reliable." He pointed to various parts as he spoke. "Fuel gauge here. Half full. Good for maybe dozen good burns. Safety here. Important to use or go boom. Trigger here. Obvious. Pilot light here. Must be lit first." He demonstrated the proper sequence for activating the weapon, then handed it back to me. "Practice aiming. Remember wind direction. Flame goes with wind. Stand up wind or burn own face off." I thanked him, genuinely appreciative of the instruction. A weapon was only as good as its wielder's knowledge of its use. I had seen orcs die due to mishandling their own guns often enough to respect the danger. "One more thing," Nazgrim said as I turned to leave. "Heard about Waaagh?" I nodded. "Big opportunity for mech like me," he continued, gesturing to the large gun he had been working on. "War need big guns, need vehicles, need good gear, need mechs." He tapped his chest proudly. "You stick with me during Waaagh, I make sure you get good stuff. Deal?" It was an interesting proposition. Mechs were valuable in Orc society, but they still needed protection. In the chaos of a Waaagh, Having a dedicated fighter watching your back could mean the difference between life and death, between scrounging scraps and having first pick of the loot. "What about Skraka?" I asked. "I in his squad." Nazgrim waved a dismissive hand. "Skraka understand. Waaagh different from raid. Everyone mix up, new groups form, new bosses rise, old bosses fall. Everything change in Waaagh." This made sense. The rigid hierarchies of peacetime orc society often dissolved in the fluid dynamics of large-scale warfare. It was how new war bosses emerged, how reputations were made and broken. "Deal," I agreed. "I watch your back. You give me good gear." Nazgrim grinned, extending a hand stained with grease and what might have been blood. "Deal." We clasped hands briefly, a rare formal gesture among our kind. Then I left him to his work and went to find a suitable place to practice with my new weapon. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as the entire camp prepared for war. More orcs arrived daily, drawn by the psychic beacon of the forming Waaagh. Small bands like ours were joined by larger mobs, some bringing significant arsenals of vehicles and heavy weapons. The camp expanded rapidly, sprawling across the landscape like a green stain. I spent my time practicing with the flamer, learning its quirks and limitations. It was a devastating weapon at close range, but useless beyond about 20 meters. Its fuel supply was limited, requiring careful conservation for maximum effect. And, as Nazgrim had warned, it was sensitive to wind conditions. I learned this lesson the hard way, singing my arm when an unexpected gust blew the flames back toward me. Skraka was busy with Warboss Grimtooth and the other knobs, planning the coming campaign. This left us boys largely to our own devices, though regular training sessions were organized to keep us sharp. These often devolved into brawls, but even that was useful practice in its own way. I saw little of Crunch during this time. The silent orc had been assigned to a scouting party, sent to gather more information about the approaching Imperial force. When he returned, 5 days after the announcement of the Waaagh, he brought disturbing news. The scouts had encountered not just ordinary Imperial Guard, but Space Marines, the legendary Adeptus Astartes, genetically enhanced super soldiers clad in power armor and armed with the finest weapons the Imperium could provide. Even one such warrior was a match for dozens of ordinary orcs. A full company of them represented a threat even to our burgeoning Waaagh. Grimtooth received this information with surprising calm. Rather than being discouraged, he seemed almost pleased by the challenge. "Better fight," he declared. "Stronger enemies make stronger orcs. When we kill Marines, we show all how mighty we are." This confidence inspired the rest of us, though I noticed some of the older, more experienced knobs exchanging concerned looks. They had faced Marines before, perhaps, and knew the true measure of the threat, but no one dared voice doubt, not with the Waaagh energy building to a fever pitch. On the 7th day of preparations, Grimtooth called the entire warband together. Thousands of orcs gathered in a natural amphitheater near the camp, a sloping basin that allowed all to see and hear the war boss as he stood upon a makeshift platform of wreckage and stone. "Tomorrow we march," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly to the furthest edges of the assembly. "Tomorrow we bring war to the Humies. Not small war, not raid, real war. Proper orky war." A roar of approval answered him, weapons brandished, feet stomping in rhythm. "They bring their best against us," Grimtooth continued when the noise had subsided slightly. "They're metal men, they're space marines. They think this scare us." He laughed, a sound like boulders colliding. "We orcs, we fear nothing. We fight anything. The bigger they are, the more fun to kill." Another roar, louder than before. "Remember," the war boss raised his power claw, the energy field casting an eerie glow across his scarred features. "We are green. Green is best. We are strongest. We are orcs. And tomorrow we are Waaagh." The final word was taken up by every throat present, a thunderous chant that seemed to shake the very ground. "Waaagh, Waaagh, Waaagh." I added my voice to the chorus, feeling the energy building, the psychic field that connected all orcs growing stronger, more coherent. It was intoxicating, a rush beyond anything I had experienced in my short life. This was what we were made for. This moment, this feeling, this promise of violence on a scale beyond imagination. That night, there was little sleep in the camp. Bonfires burned high, around which orcs danced, fought, feasted, and boasted of the deeds they would perform in the coming battle. Crude alcohol flowed freely, further inflaming passions already running hot. I indulged moderately, wanting to keep my wits sharp for what lay ahead. I found Nazgrim making final adjustments to a collection of weapons laid out on a tarp. He greeted me with a nod, then pointed to a set of makeshift armor pieces. "For you," he said, "not fancy, basic protection. Better than nothing." The armor consisted of scavenged Imperial Guard flak plates, modified to fit orc proportions and reinforced with additional metal scraps. It would not stop a bolter round or a power sword, but it might turn aside lesser weapons or at least reduce the damage they inflicted. "Thanks," I said, trying on the chest piece. It fit reasonably well, tight enough to stay in place during movement, but not so tight as to restrict my breathing or mobility. Nazgrim helped me secure the rest of the pieces, then handed me a bandolier of fuel canisters for my flamer. "Full tank in weapon," he explained. "These for reload, 6 total, make them count." I nodded, understanding the value of such a gift. Fuel was precious, carefully hoarded by those with flame weapons. For Nazgrim to provide so much indicated that our arrangement was more than just convenient words. "Tomorrow, stay close," the mech instructed. "Front line, dangerous place for mech. You keep burner ready. Anyone get too close to me, you cook them. Clear?" "Clear," I confirmed. "Where in formation we go?" Nazgrim pointed to a crude map spread out nearby, showing the planned deployment of the Waaagh. "Here," he indicated a position in the second wave, behind the initial assault force, but ahead of the heavy support elements. "Good spot, see plenty action. Not first to die." This seemed a reasonable compromise between safety and opportunity. The front ranks would absorb the initial defensive fire, breaking upon the Imperial lines like a wave upon rocks. But many would die in that first clash. The second wave would exploit the breaches created, pushing deeper into enemy territory where kill opportunities would be plentiful. I spent the remainder of the night checking and rechecking my equipment, ensuring everything was in working order. My flamer was clean and properly fueled. My backup weapon, a crude axe I had traded for with another boy, was sharp and securely fastened to my belt. My armor, such as it was fitted as well as possible and would not shift during combat. Morning came with the blaring of horns and the revving of engines. The Waaagh was assembling, thousands of orcs forming into their designated groups. The noise was overwhelming, a physical presence that beat against the ears and vibrated in the chest. Clouds of dust rose as vehicles took their positions, from small bikes to massive battle wagons and the looming silhouettes of salvaged tanks. I found Nazgrim amidst the chaos, the mech loading equipment onto a lightweight vehicle with a mounted gun. He waved me over, pointing to the passenger seat. "You ride with me," he shouted over the din. "Better than walking, save energy for fighting." I clambered aboard, securing my flamer within easy reach. The driver, a Gretchen too small to fight effectively but skilled enough to operate the vehicle, gave me a nervous glance. Gretchen knew their place in the hierarchy, and it was firmly at the bottom, useful only for their dexterity and willingness to perform tasks orcs found beneath them. Nazgrim took position at the mounted gun, a heavy shooter that he had personally modified for increased rate of fire at the cost of accuracy. In a mass engagement like the one to come, precision was less important than volume. The signal to move out came in the form of a massive explosion at the front of the column, Grimtooth's way of saying "go," as subtle as everything else about him. The Waaagh lurched into motion, a green tide flowing across the landscape toward the Imperial positions some 10 kilometers distant. The journey was surprisingly orderly by orc standards. The various mobs maintained their relative positions, the faster elements not racing too far ahead, the slower ones not falling too far behind. It was a testament to the power of the Waaagh energy, aligning thousands of normally chaotic individuals into a coherent, fighting force. As we approached the battlefield, the first signs of Imperial presence became visible. A line of fortifications stretched across a natural choke point between two ridges, blocking the most direct route to the human settlements beyond. Guard towers and bunkers dotted the defensive line, their weapon emplacements covering every approach. Behind them, the distinctive shapes of Imperial tanks could be seen, Lehman Russ battle tanks and Chimera transports arranged in supporting positions. And there, at the center of the line, stood the Space Marines. Even from a distance, they were unmistakable. Giants in power, armor of deep blue, adorned with symbols and insignia I did not recognize but instinctively hated. There were perhaps 100 of them, a small number compared to our thousands, but each was a walking engine of destruction. The sight did not dismay the Waaagh. If anything, it increased the frenzy, the prospect of such worthy opponents driving the collective bloodlust to new heights. Engines revved harder, war cries grew louder, trigger fingers became itchier. The first shots were fired by the Imperial artillery, massive shells arcing high into the air before plummeting down among our advancing forces. Explosions blossomed across the Orc lines, sending bodies and vehicle parts flying, but for every Orc killed, 10 more surged forward, heedless of danger, driven by the Waaagh. Our own artillery began to return fire, a motley collection of looted Imperial weapons and Orc-made big shooters. Their accuracy was questionable, but what they lacked in precision they made up for in volume and enthusiasm. The air filled with the screech of rockets, the thump of shells, and the constant background rattle of smaller caliber fire. And then we were in range of the defensive line's direct fire weapons. Heavy bolters and autocannons opened up, sweeping across our front ranks with devastating effect. Orcs fell by the dozen, their bodies torn apart by the high-caliber rounds. But still, the Waaagh advanced. Our technical was part of the second wave, holding position just behind the crest of a low hill as the first wave broke upon the Imperial defenses like a green tide. I watched through a pair of scavenged binoculars as Orc bodies piled up against the fortifications, creating grisly ramps that subsequent attackers used to scale the walls. The Space Marines held the center of the line, their bolters firing with methodical precision, each shot finding an Orc target. But they were facing thousands, and even their superhuman abilities had limits. Slowly, inevitably, the sheer mass of the Orc assault began to tell. Breaches appeared in the defensive line as bunkers were overrun or destroyed by lucky artillery hits. "Now we go," Nazgrim shouted, slapping the roof of the technical. The Gretchen driver gunned the engine, and we surged forward, joining a wave of vehicles and infantry pouring toward the weakened sections of the Imperial line. As we drew closer, I got my first clear look at a Space Marine in combat. It was a sight both terrifying and awe-inspiring. One warrior, his armor scarred but unbowed, stood atop a collapsed section of wall, firing his bolter one-handed while wielding a power sword in the other. Each swing of that energy-wreathed blade cleaved through multiple Orcs, their bodies falling away in pieces. Each bolter shot exploded inside its target, turning Orc flesh into green mist. Yet for every Orc that fell, 2 more took his place. The Marine was slowly disappearing beneath a tide of green bodies, though the pile of corpses around him grew ever higher. This was the nature of Orc warfare against such elite enemies. We would drown them in our numbers, paying in blood for every meter gained, but gaining it nonetheless. Our technical bounced and jolted across the uneven ground, now littered with craters and bodies. Nazgrim fired the heavy shooter in continuous bursts, the barrel beginning to glow with heat. I braced myself, flamer at the ready, preparing for the moment we would hit the line and dismount to join the melee. That moment came suddenly and violently. A rocket struck the ground just ahead of us, the explosion lifting the front of the technical into the air. We flipped, the world spinning around me as I was thrown clear. I hit the ground hard, my crude armor absorbing some of the impact but still leaving me dazed. I struggled to my feet, searching for my flamer. It lay a few meters away, miraculously intact. The technical was a burning wreck, the Gretchen driver nowhere to be seen, presumably crushed in the crash. Nazgrim was pulling himself from the wreckage, one arm hanging limp at his side, blood flowing from a gash on his forehead. "You alive," he observed, stumbling toward me. "Good. Still need protection." I retrieved my flamer and moved to the mech's side, supporting him as we made our way toward the Imperial line. All around us, the battle raged in its full fury. Orcs had breached the defenses in multiple places now, pouring through the gaps to engage the defenders in close combat. The disciplined volleys of Imperial fire had devolved into desperate point-blank exchanges and brutal hand-to-hand fighting. We reached the line at a section where the wall had been completely demolished, reduced to rubble over which orcs were scrambling to reach the Imperial positions beyond. Nazgrim paused, catching his breath, assessing the situation with a tactician's eye unusual for our species. "Marines falling back," he noted, pointing to a group of the armored giants who were indeed conducting a fighting retreat toward a secondary position. "Good for us. Bad for us. They not running. Regrouping. We'll counterattack soon." This insight proved prophetic. Even as we watched, more Space Marines appeared from behind the secondary line, these mounted on assault bikes that roared as they charged toward the Orc breakthrough. Behind them came heavy support in the form of Centurion, suits, walking arsenals whose every movement unleashed storms of firepower. The Orcs who had breached the line found themselves caught in a devastating crossfire, but rather than retreat, they surged forward with renewed vigor, seeking to close with the Marines before their superior firepower could thin the green ranks too severely. "We go right," Nazgrim decided. "Away from main counterattack. Find weaker point. Get behind them." It was sound strategy, and I followed his lead as we skirted the heaviest fighting, moving along the collapsed wall toward a section where the Imperial Guard, not Marines, held the line. These human soldiers were formidable in their own right, but they lacked the transhuman advantages of the Adeptus Astartes. They were prey we could handle. We joined a small mob of orcs assaulting this section, adding our firepower to theirs. I used my flamer for the first time in actual combat, sending a stream of burning promethium into a guard position. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Human figures emerged from the bunker wreathed in flames, screaming as they burned. Some tried to stop, drop, and roll as their training dictated. Others simply ran blindly, spreading panic among their comrades. The sight filled me with a savage joy. This was power. This was what it meant to be Orc. To bring death and destruction to the enemy, to hear their screams, to smell their burning flesh. I advanced, playing the flamer across another position. Another group of humans transformed into living torches. Nazgrim stayed close behind me, using a pistol he had produced from somewhere to pick off any guards who emerged with their weapons still functional. We made an effective team, the terror caused by my flamer creating openings that the mech exploited with precision shots. We had pushed about 50 meters into the Imperial position when we encountered our first Space Marine. He appeared suddenly from behind a demolished tank, his armor scorched and dented but still operational. In his hands was a plasma gun, its coils glowing with barely contained energy. I reacted instinctively, swinging my flamer toward this new threat and depressing the trigger. The stream of burning fuel struck the Marine directly, enveloping him in flames. Against normal enemies, this would have been decisive. Against a Space Marine, it was merely an inconvenience. He strode through the fire, his armor's systems handling the extreme heat, and raised his plasma gun. Nazgrim shoved me aside just as the weapon discharged, a bolt of blue-white energy passing through the space where I had been standing. It struck an orc behind us, vaporizing his upper body instantly. The Marine's attention now fixed on Nazgrim, recognizing perhaps that the mech represented a greater threat due to his technical knowledge. This gave me an opening. I circled to the side, then charged, closing the distance before the Marine could bring his plasma gun to bear again. I crashed into him with all my strength, staggering him slightly but failing to knock him down. It was like hitting a wall of adamantium. The Marine backhanded me with casual strength, sending me sprawling to the ground, my crude armor cracking under the impact. As he turned his attention back to Nazgrim, I scrambled to my feet and assessed the situation. The flamer had limited effect against his armor, but every warrior had weaknesses. The joints, the neck seal, the eye lenses. I needed to target these. Nazgrim was backing away, firing his pistol at the advancing Marine. The shots pinged harmlessly off the ceramite plates of his power armor. The mech stumbled over debris, falling backward just as the Marine raised his plasma gun for a killing shot. I launched myself forward again, this time aiming low, at the Marine's knees. The impact disrupted his aim, sending the plasma bolt wild. It struck a nearby fuel container, which exploded in a fireball that engulfed several orcs and guardsmen locked in combat nearby. The Marine staggered but remained upright. He swung around, impossibly fast for something so large, and grabbed me by the throat. His grip was like iron, cutting off my air, crushing my windpipe. I struggled, kicking and punching to no effect. Through the red haze descending over my vision, I saw Nazgrim rise and dart forward, something clutched in his hand. The mech slapped the object against the Marine's backpack, the power unit of his armor, then dived away. The Marine seemed to realize the danger too late. He released me, reaching back to remove whatever Nazgrim had attached. But before his hand could reach it, the device detonated. It was not a large explosion, but it was precisely placed. The Marine's power armor lost power, the servos freezing, trapping him inside what was now essentially a metal coffin. He toppled like a felled tree, hitting the ground with a resounding crash. I gasped for air, my throat bruised but functional. Nazgrim was already at the Marine's side, his good arm working frantically at the armor's neck seal. "Help," he commanded. "Need to get inside. Valuable, very valuable." I understood. Space Marine equipment was among the most advanced the Imperium possessed. For a mech, access to such technology was an opportunity beyond price. I joined him, my stronger muscles straining against the emergency release mechanisms of the armor. With a hiss of escaping pressure, the helmet came free. The face beneath was pale, with a patrician cast to its features, now contorted in a grimace of pain and hatred. The Marine was still alive, still conscious, his superhuman physiology sustaining him despite the damage to his armor. "Xenos filth," he spat, blood flecking his lips. "The Emperor's angels will cleanse this world of your taint." Nazgrim ignored the words, focused entirely on the helmet he now held, examining its systems with the reverence of a tech priest. I studied the Marine's face, fascinated by this close look at humanity's finest. Warrior. Despite his situation, there was no fear in his eyes. Only contempt and a burning resolve. "Kill me and be done with it," the Marine said. "I die in service to the Emperor, while you live only to spread destruction." I considered his words. There was truth in them, from a certain perspective. Orcs did live for destruction, for war. It was our nature, our purpose. But was that really so different from these Marines, bred and conditioned for nothing but battle? "We not so different," I told him, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Philosophical discussion was not typical orc behavior. You fight for your god, we fight because we are orcs. Same result. War forever. The Marine's expression shifted slightly, surprise momentarily replacing contempt. Then his features hardened again. "We are nothing alike, Greenskin. We fight to protect humanity. You fight because you know nothing else." Before I could respond, Nazgrim interrupted. "Stop talking to food," he scolded. "Kill Marine, take armor, important parts inside chest piece, heart, black thing, both valuable." He was right, of course. This was war, not a debate club. The Marine was an enemy, nothing more. I reached for my axe, preparing to deliver the killing blow. The Marine met my gaze without flinching. "My brothers will avenge me," he stated with absolute certainty. "The Ultramarines do not forget their fallen." The name meant nothing to me, but the conviction in his voice gave me pause. Not out of fear, but out of respect for a worthy adversary. I raised the axe higher, wanting to make the end quick and clean, a warrior's death. The blade never fell. A thunderous explosion shook the ground, throwing me off balance. I turned to see a massive Imperial tank, larger than any I had yet encountered, cresting a rise not 100 meters away. Its main cannon was aimed directly at our position, and even as I watched, it fired again. The shell struck nearby, the shockwave sending me tumbling across the rubble-strewn ground. My head struck something hard, and darkness claimed me. I awoke to pain and the taste of blood. My body felt broken, unresponsive. With tremendous effort, I managed to open my eyes. The sky above was dark with smoke, flashes of weapons fire illuminating the clouds like lightning in a storm. The sounds of battle had changed, become more distant, sporadic rather than constant. I tried to move and found that I could not. Looking down, I saw why. A slab of rockreet had fallen across my lower body, pinning me to the ground. Blood, my blood, had pooled around me, soaking into the earth. I was dying. The knowledge came with surprising clarity and acceptance. With effort, I turned my head, surveying my surroundings. Bodies littered the ground, orc and human alike, united in death as they never could be in life. Of Nazgrim, there was no sign. Perhaps he had escaped. Perhaps he lay dead somewhere beyond my field of vision. The Space Marine was gone as well, his armor empty on the ground where he had fallen. Whether his brothers had rescued him or Nazgrim had finished harvesting his augmented organs before fleeing, I could not say. In the distance, I could see the battle continuing. The Waaagh had pushed deep into Imperial territory, green hordes flowing around pockets of resistance like water around rocks. But something had changed. The tide was no longer advancing. In places, it was even receding. As my vision began to dim, I realized what had happened. Reinforcements had arrived for the Imperials. More Space Marines, these in different colors, dropping from the sky in pods of metal that crashed into the heart of the Orc forces. Fresh Guard regiments deploying from massive landers on the far side of the battlefield. The Waaagh was strong, but even it had limits. I felt no despair at this realization. Victory or defeat, it mattered little to an individual Orc. What mattered was the fighting itself, the glorious struggle that gave meaning to our existence. I had fought, I had killed, I had grown stronger. That was enough. As consciousness began to slip away, my thoughts turned unexpectedly to the human female from the farm, the one who had died protecting her offspring. There had been purpose in her end, meaning beyond simple survival or dominance. Was there something similar in mine? Had my brief life served some greater purpose in the endless war that consumed the galaxy? It was not an orky thought. Perhaps blood loss was making me delirious. Or perhaps, in my final moments, I was glimpsing something that eluded most of my kind, a perspective beyond the simple joy of violence. The darkness grew deeper, the sounds of battle faded. My last conscious thought was a simple one, the core truth of my existence. I was Orc. I had lived as Orc. I died as Orc. And somewhere, my spores would give rise to more of my kind, and the cycle would continue. Forever war, forever Orc. Green is best. The last thing I saw, as my vision finally failed, was a boot stepping into view beside my head. A blue boot, massive, belonging to a Space Marine. There was a sound, the whine of a weapon powering up, and then nothing. Nothing but darkness, nothing but war. Nothing but the endless cycle of violence that defines the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods.